My mom called me useless at the party. That sentence alone should not be able to stop a room. But it did. 40 people. Crystal glasses midair. Conversation dying like a candle pinched between two fingers. And Marcella Larkins, standing at the head of her own dining table, wine glass in hand, smile perfectly in place, not even flinching at what just came out of her mouth. And Nora. Nora stood 3 feet away, in a dress she had ironed that morning, holding a clutch she almost didn't bring, feeling every single pair of eyes in that room find her face all at once.
She didn't cry. She didn't speak.
But somewhere inside her coat pocket, her phone was buzzing, quiet, persistent, unknown. A call she hadn't answered yet. She had no idea that call was about to change everything. You clicked on this because you know exactly what it feels like to be underestimated by the one person who is supposed to believe in you most. That specific kind of silence, the one that follows a public wound. You felt it, maybe not at a party, maybe at a dinner table, or a family gathering, or a moment you still haven't told anyone about. But what happens when the truth doesn't arrive quietly? What happens when it doesn't come in a private conversation or a gentle apology, but in a phone call, in the middle of a crowded room, in front of everyone who heard the lie? Stay with Nora. Because what unfolds next doesn't just silence the room, it dismantles something that should have been addressed a long time ago. And by the time this story is over, nothing in the Larkins family will look the same. Before we go any further, what do you think happens when that call finally comes through? Drop your theory in the comments right now.
No googling.
Just your gut. Let's see how close you are by the end. The night started with a lie. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind that announces itself. Just the quiet, domestic kind. A text from her mother 3 days earlier that said, "Dinner Saturday. Just us. Don't be late. Just us." Nora had read those 2 words and felt something loosen in her chest. She had been working long hours. She had missed 3 family dinners in the past 2 months. She wanted to come. She wanted to sit at her mother's table and eat something warm and not have to explain herself. Just sounded like exactly that. She arrived at 6:47 p.m. She heard the party before she reached the front door. Music. Voices layered over each other. The distinct sound of a home performing. She stood on the front step for a moment, hand on the door handle, and breathed. Then she pushed it open. The house was full. Not a little full. Not a few extra people full. 40 people full. The kind of full where someone has moved the furniture and set out extra chairs and strung soft lights above the dining table and arranged flowers in vases that don't live there on regular days. Colleagues in pressed shirts. Relatives Nora hadn't seen in over a year. Her mother's friends in heels, laughing too loudly near the kitchen. And at the center of it all, Oliver. Her brother stood in the living room like he had been placed there by a director. Tall, polished, comfortable. He was holding a glass of something amber and speaking with the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his life wondered if he belonged in the room. His firm's name was printed on a banner near the fireplace. Congratulations, Oliver Larkins, Senior Associate. A promotion party. Nora hadn't known. She had not been told. She had been told just us, and she had come in a simple dress with her hair pulled back, and now she was standing in the doorway of a party she was not prepared for, surrounded by people who all seemed to know exactly why they were there. Her mother appeared from the kitchen before Nora could process any of it. Marcella Larkins moved through her own home like someone who had choreographed it. Silk blouse, gold earrings, hair set just so. She reached Nora at the door, touched her elbow lightly, and leaned in close enough that only Nora could hear. "You're late," she said. "And please try not to look so out of place tonight. This is important." Nora opened her mouth. Her mother had already turned back toward her guests. She watched Marcella glide back into the room, seamlessly rejoining a conversation mid-sentence, laughing at something a woman in a red dress had said, completely unbothered. Nora stood at the entrance of her childhood home and felt, very quietly, like a visitor. She found a space near the wall and stayed there. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She watched her brother work the room, the handshakes, the laughter, the effortless charm. Oliver was good at this. He had always been good at this. Rooms responded to him the way flowers lean toward light. Natural. Inevitable. She told herself it was fine. She told herself she was proud of him. She was in her own complicated way. Oliver worked hard. His promotion was real. She had no argument with his success. It was the way their mother looked at him that she had no language for yet. Marcella watched Oliver the way people watch something they built with their own hands. Like possession and pride had merged into a single expression. She steered guests toward him. She set up introductions. She refilled his glass without being asked. She orbited him. And when their father, Elias, stood up to make a toast, when he raised his glass and cleared his throat and the room settled into a respectful hush, Marcella was right beside Oliver, hand touching his arm, face already glowing before a single word was said. Elias spoke warmly. He spoke about hard work, about watching his son become a man he was proud of. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, the way fathers' voices do when they don't have the right words and emotion fills the space instead. The room raised their glasses. And then Marcella spoke, not because anyone asked her to, not because Elias had left space for it, but simply because she had something she wanted to say. Oliver is proof, she said, lifting her glass, that hard work pays off. She paused. A smile touched the corner of her mouth. Unlike some people in this room. She didn't look at Nora directly. She didn't have to. Every other pair of eyes found her on their own. Nora felt the heat rise in her face before she could stop it. The particular burn of public humiliation, the one that starts at the throat and spreads upward. She kept her expression still. She kept her eyes forward. She held the sparkling water glass with both hands and did not let them shake. A beat of silence passed. Then conversation resumed. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed near the kitchen. The moment folded itself back into the noise of the party like it had never happened at all. But it had happened. And 40 people had heard it. A woman standing near Nora, a neighbor she vaguely recognized, soft-spoken, gray-haired, leaned toward her mother. "What is it that Nora does again?" she asked, genuinely curious.
No agenda.
Just the kind of question people ask at parties when they're trying to be polite. Marcella set her glass down on the table with a small, practiced sigh. Nora. She said the name the way people say the name of a problem they've grown tired of explaining. Nora has never really amounted to anything. She shook her head gently, as if the thought genuinely saddened her. She's always been the one we worry about. She means well, of course. She just hasn't ever found her footing. She smiled as she said it. A warm, maternal, completely devastating smile. The neighbor nodded uncertainly, not sure what to do with that, and turned to refill her plate. Nora did not move. She stood in the same spot she had been standing, and she heard every word, and she let them land, and she did not react, because reacting would have meant her mother had succeeded in making her small, and she refused to give her that. But something had shifted. Deep and quiet, the way tectonic plates shift. Nothing visible on the surface, but the ground was no longer the same underneath. Her phone vibrated against her hip. She reached into her clutch without looking. Unknown number. She pressed the side button and silenced it.
Not now.
She couldn't step away now, without it looking like retreat. She stayed. She breathed. She watched Oliver accept another handshake from a man in a charcoal suit, laughing at something the man said, looking every inch the golden son his mother had always believed him to be. And then, across the room, through the shifting crowd, past the Camelot table and the catered trays and the low music someone had turned back up, she saw Tobias. He was standing near the bookshelf by the far wall, a glass in his hand, completely still in the way that only quiet people can be still in a loud room. He wasn't performing. He wasn't working the room. He was just watching. He was watching her. Their eyes met. And Tobias, steady, unhurried Tobias, who had known her for 7 years and never once needed her to be anything other than exactly what she was, gave her the smallest, most deliberate nod she had ever received in her life. I see you.
Not I'm sorry.
Not are you okay? Just, I see you. I was here. I heard it. You're not imagining it. You are not alone. Nora exhaled. She turned and walked quietly toward the back of the house, past the hallway with the family photos, past the laundry room with the door left ajar, and out through the back door onto the wooden porch that overlooked her mother's small garden. The night air was cold and immediate, the way October air is, sharp and honest in a way the inside of that house was not. She stood at the railing and let herself breathe for the first time in over an hour. Her phone buzzed again. She looked down. Same unknown number. For a moment, she almost silenced it again. She was tired. Her face was still warm. She wanted 60 seconds of quiet before she had to go back inside and pretend the last 3 hours hadn't happened. But something stopped her. Something she couldn't name, a pull, an instinct, the particular feeling of a moment that matters before you understand why it matters. She didn't answer it. Instead, she let it ring out, and the second the call ended, she pressed voicemail. She held the phone to her ear. And in the cold October air, on the back porch of her mother's house, with 40 people 30 feet away celebrating a man her mother called proof, Nora heard a voice she recognized immediately.
Calm.
Authoritative. Unmistakable. Malcolm Reed. And the first thing he said made her close her eyes. Malcolm's voice was unhurried, but there was something underneath it, a current of contained excitement, the kind that serious people allow themselves only when something genuinely significant has happened.
Nora.
It's Malcolm Reed. I apologize for the hour. I wouldn't be calling on a Saturday evening if this weren't important. I need you to call me back as soon as you get this. There's been a development with the Meridian project, a significant one. Tonight, if possible. The voicemail ended. Nora lowered the phone slowly from her ear. The garden in front of her was dark and still. A wind moved through the hedgerow at the far end, rustling it briefly, then settling. Somewhere inside, someone turned the music up another notch. The bass reached her through the back wall of the house, muffled and distant, like noise from another world. She stood there a moment with Malcolm's voice still echoing in her head. A significant development. She knew exactly what project he meant. She had known from the first syllable. 18 months ago, Nora Larkins had signed a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive that her own mother didn't know what she did for a living anymore. That was not an accident. The Meridian project was a government-adjacent urban renewal consultancy contract, the kind that didn't get announced in press releases until everything was finished, verified, and signed off at 3 different levels of approval. The kind of work that didn't allow for LinkedIn posts or dinner table conversations or satisfying answers when relatives asked what you'd been up to lately. Nora had taken the contract 18 months earlier, when the opportunity was presented to her through Malcolm's firm, quietly, deliberately, and with the full knowledge that she would be invisible for the duration of it.
She had said yes anyway.
She believed in the work. What the Meridian project actually was, in the simplest terms, was a large-scale urban infrastructure renewal plan for a mid-sized American city dealing with decades of underinvestment.
Roads.
Water systems. Community spaces. The kind of structural work that doesn't make headlines until it's done and people look around and realize the city they live in quietly became better while they weren't paying attention. Nora's specific role was project coordination and impact assessment. She was the person who sat between the engineers and the city officials and the federal funding bodies and made sure every piece connected to every other piece without collapsing under its own weight. She had worked weekends. She had taken calls at midnight. She had eaten dinner at her desk more evenings than she could count, and she had done it without telling a single person in her family what she was building, because she couldn't. The NDA was ironclad. But there was more to it than legal obligation. Part of her, the part that had grown up watching Oliver be celebrated for every visible thing while she labored quietly at 1,000 invisible ones, part of her had wanted to see what it felt like to do something extraordinary and let the work speak entirely for itself.
No previous. No updates.
No watch this space. Just the work. Finished.
Real.
Standing on its own. She had taken a pay cut in the first 8 months while the contract's performance metrics were still being evaluated. She had missed her cousin's wedding. She had missed her father's birthday dinner. She had missed Christmas Eve because there was a critical deliverable due on the 26th, and the preparation couldn't wait. Her mother had called her drift. Nora's going through a phase. She'd overheard Marcella tell someone on the phone once. She took some kind of contract job. Nothing stable. You know how she is. You know how she is. She had pressed her palms flat on her kitchen counter when she heard that and breathed until the sting of it passed. And then she had gone back to her desk and kept working. The back door opened behind her. She didn't turn around immediately. She already knew the footsteps. Oliver stepped out onto the porch and stood beside her, looking out at the dark garden, hands in his pockets. He was quiet for a moment, the practiced quiet of someone deciding how to begin. "Hey," he said finally. "Hey," she said back. Another pause. "Don't take it personally," he said. "You know how she gets at these things. She's proud. And when she's proud of one thing she sometimes doesn't." He stopped. Searched for the right word. "Doesn't what?" Nora asked. Oliver exhaled slowly through his nose. "She just wishes you'd done something more." Another pause. "Careful. Deliberate. Visible." He said the word gently, like the gentleness would soften its edges. "Something she could point to. You know? She doesn't mean it the way it sounds." Nora looked at him. He was looking out at the garden, not at her, his jaw set in the expression he wore when he believed he was being reasonable. She thought about 18 months of work she couldn't describe to him. She thought about every weekend she hadn't slept. She thought about the city whose infrastructure she had spent a year and a half helping redesign, whose residents would one day walk better roads and drink cleaner water without ever knowing her name. And she thought about Oliver standing here telling her, with genuine kindness, that the problem was simply that she hadn't been visible enough. She didn't say any of that. "Thank you, Oliver," she said quietly. He nodded, satisfied, and patted her once on the shoulder, the way you pat someone when you believe you've helped them, and went back inside. Nora turned back to the garden. She stood there for exactly 4 seconds before the back door opened again. This time it was not Oliver. Marcella stepped onto the porch, and she was not alone. She had brought 2 of her friends with her, women Nora had known peripherally since childhood, women who attended everything and remembered everything and repeated most of it. "There you are," Marcella said, her voice carrying the particular brightness of someone performing concern. "What are you doing out here in the cold?" "Getting some air," Nora said. "Are you sulking?" Her mother tilted her head. "Because if you're sulking, I need you to know, this is your brother's night." She gestured loosely back toward the house. "Can you, for once, not make everything about you?" Nora had not said a word inside the party after the toast. She had stood near the wall. She had accepted a glass of water. She had walked quietly to the back porch. She had spoken to no one except Oliver, and only because Oliver had come to find her. She had not made a scene. She had not made a comment. She had not made anything about herself. She looked at her mother and said nothing. "I'm not asking you to perform," Marcella continued, softer now. "The friends watching. I'm asking you to be present. For your brother, who has actually worked for something." The 2 friends said nothing. One of them looked at the garden. The other looked at her shoes. Nora looked past her mother, through the open back door, into the warm light of the house, and found her father. Elias was standing in the kitchen doorway, not 10 feet away. Close enough to have heard everything. Close enough to step outside and say something, anything, a single sentence. That's enough, Marcella. Just enough to let his daughter know that at least one person in this house had not decided she was worth nothing. He met her eyes. And then he looked away. He turned back into the kitchen, set his glass on the counter, and picked up a conversation with someone near the stove. He always looked away. Nora had stopped being surprised by it years ago. The surprise had calcified into something quieter and harder, not anger, exactly. More like the feeling of a door you'd stopped trying to open because you finally accepted it was never going to move. She looked back at her mother. "I'll be inside in a minute," she said. Marcella studied her for a moment, the practiced assessment of a woman who had spent decades measuring her daughter and finding her short, and then nodded once and went back inside with her friends. The door clicked shut. If you have ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should see you clearest, hit like right now. You are not alone. And neither is Nora. She waited until she was certain no one else was coming. Then she called Malcolm back. He answered on the second ring. "Nora." His voice was immediate, alert. Not the tone of a man who had been half asleep on a Saturday night. The tone of a man who had been waiting. "Malcolm, I just got your voicemail. What's happening?" I'll get straight to it, he said. The Meridian project has been shortlisted for the National Urban Renewal Excellence Award. The Independent Review Board completed their assessment this week. We received official confirmation this afternoon.
A beat.
Your name is on the submission, Nora. As lead coordinator. As the architect of the impact framework. She said nothing. The award body is releasing their shortlist publicly at midnight tonight. Press release goes to every major industry outlet simultaneously. Your name, your role, your firm, it goes live in. She heard him check something. Just under 2 hours. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere behind her, through the wall of the house, 40 people were laughing. Nora? Malcolm said. I'm here, she said. I'm here. She stopped. Started again. The NDA. The confidentiality terms expire the moment the public announcement goes out, he said. That was always the arrangement. You know that. She did know that. She had known it for 18 months. She had simply, in the way you stop imagining a door opening when you've been standing in a hallway long enough, she had stopped calculating what midnight might actually look like. And now midnight was 2 hours away. Her name, her work, the thing she had built in silence while her family looked at the empty space where she stood and decided the emptiness was her fault. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed.
I understand, she said.
Thank you for calling, Malcolm. You earned this, he said simply.
Don't be modest about it.
Not tonight. They said goodbye, and she ended the call. She stood on the porch for a long moment, phone warm in her hand, October air cold on her face. She could leave. That was an option. She could say she wasn't feeling well, call a car, be home in 20 minutes, and watch midnight arrive from her own apartment with a cup of tea and the quiet satisfaction of a person whose privacy had finally run its course. She thought about that option carefully. Then she went back inside. She moved through the hallway without speaking to anyone, found an empty chair at the far end of the dining table, and sat down. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher near the centerpiece. She folded her hands in front of her, and she waited. The party had thinned slightly, some guests migrating toward the living room, others clustering near the kitchen. Oliver was still at the center of it, still performing, still magnetic. Marcella moved between groups like a current, keeping the energy circulating, touching arms and laughing and refilling glasses. Nora watched it all from her chair and said nothing. Silas Monroe was sitting 2 seats away from her. One of Oliver's colleagues from the firm, compact and quick-eyed, the kind of man who was always the first to know things at a party because he was always the first to check his phone. He was scrolling now, thumb moving fast, the low light of the screen catching his face. He made a small sound. Not quite surprise. More like recognition. Huh, he said, mostly to himself, though the table was quiet enough that the people nearest him looked up. There's apparently a major National Consulting Award announcement dropping at midnight tonight. Urban Renewal category. He glanced up briefly, then back at his phone. Didn't know that was happening. The woman across from him leaned in slightly. What award? National Urban Renewal Excellence Award, Silas said, still reading. They're dropping the shortlist at midnight. Some big infrastructure project, apparently. A few people nodded vaguely. Someone made a polite sound of interest. Nobody looked at Nora. Nobody had any reason to. She kept her hands folded on the table and kept her face still and said absolutely nothing. It was 11:43 when Marcella drifted back to the dining table with a glass of red wine and 3 of her closest friends in tow, filling the chairs around Nora with the ease of people who owned every room they entered. The conversation at the table had been light. The law firm, Oliver's new caseload, a holiday someone was planning. Nora had contributed nothing and nobody had asked her to. Then Marcella glanced at her, a sideways look, almost casual, and smiled at the table with the warmth of a woman who is about to be funny. You know what Nora's greatest achievement is? She said. The table quieted. Showing up tonight. Marcella raised her glass slightly, as if in a toast. That is genuinely all she's managed. Laughter moved around the table. Some of it polite, the uncomfortable kind that people produce when they don't know what else to do. Some of it real. One of the friends laughed the loudest. Nora's jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands. Then she looked at her watch. 11:44. 16 minutes. She unfolded her hands, reached for her water glass, and took a slow, deliberate sip. 16 minutes. She set the glass down. She smoothed the front of her dress. And she stayed exactly where she was, at the table, in the room, in the house, because she had decided something on that back porch, and she was not going to undo it now. Whatever her mother believed she was, whatever this room had decided about her tonight, in 16 minutes, the record was going to correct itself. And she was going to be sitting right here when it did. The clock on Nora's phone read 11:58. 2 minutes. The dining table had refilled as the night wound toward its natural close. People gravitating back to their seats, finishing drinks, the particular energy of a party that knows it is almost over, settling into the room like a slow exhale. Conversations had grown looser. Someone near the fireplace was telling a long story that kept getting interrupted by laughter. Oliver was leaning back in his chair at the head of the table, one arm draped over the back of it, relaxed in the way of a man whose evening had gone exactly as planned. Marcella was pouring the last of a wine bottle into her glass. Nora sat where she had been sitting for the past hour, hands in her lap, water glass in front of her.
Still.
11:59. She watched the second hand in her mind without looking at her phone again. She had stopped checking it. She didn't need to anymore. She could feel it, the specific weight of a moment that is about to arrive, the way the air changes just before something that cannot be undone. The table blurred softly at the edges of her vision. Oliver's voice, her mother's laugh, the clink of a fork against a plate. All of it present, all of it distant, all of it running underneath the single quiet fact she had been sitting with for the last hour. Midnight. Her phone screen lit up. Not a buzz, not a vibration, just the screen, illuminating silently on the table beside her water glass, Malcolm Reed's name in clean white letters against the dark. Nora looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she picked it up and answered it, out loud, at the table, without lowering her voice, without excusing herself, without stepping away. "Malcolm," she said. The conversation nearest her paused. Not the whole room, just the immediate radius, the way a stone dropped in still water affects the surface closest to it first. Malcolm's voice came through clearly. She hadn't put it on speaker.
She didn't need to.
The table was quiet enough. "Nora." His voice was warm, the contained, professional warmth of a man who did not celebrate often and meant it when he did. "It just went live. I wanted you to hear it from me first." A brief pause. "Congratulations. You're the lead architect on the most recognized public infrastructure consulting project in the country this year. The press release named you specifically. Your work on the Impact Coordination Framework was cited by the review board as the defining factor in the shortlist decision." Nora said nothing for a moment. "Thank you, Malcolm," she said. "You earned it," he said. "Enjoy your evening." The call ended. She set the phone face down on the table. And the room, not just the table, but the whole room, was quiet in a way it had not been all night. Oliver had stopped mid-sentence. Whatever he had been saying to the man beside him had simply ceased, left unfinished in the air, because his attention had moved, involuntarily, instinctively, to his sister. His expression was not readable yet. It was the expression of someone whose brain is still catching up to what their ears just processed. Marcella's smile had not disappeared. It had frozen. The particular freeze of a smile that the face is still holding out of muscle memory, while the mind behind it has gone completely still. Her wine glass was raised slightly. She had been about to take a sip, and she had simply stopped, mid-motion, suspended. Silas Monroe had his phone out before anyone else moved. He was already typing, fast and focused, the way people type when they're verifying something they need to be sure about before they say it out loud. His eyes moved between the screen and Nora twice. Then he looked up. "Nora Larkins," he read aloud, and his voice had changed, the easy party conversation tone replaced with something slower, more deliberate. He was reading directly from his screen. "Lead consultant and impact framework architect, recognized for landmark urban infrastructure renewal initiative, National Urban Renewal Excellence Award shortlist confirmed." He set his phone down on the table. He looked at Nora. He looked at Marcella. He looked back at Nora. That just went live. That's you. Nora held his gaze and said nothing. Silas sat back in his chair with the quiet expression of a man recalibrating everything he had observed over the course of the evening. Oliver's hand moved slowly to his inside jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone without a word. He found the article in seconds. It was already circulating, already being shared, the kind of announcement that moves fast in industry circles. He read it in silence, his face angled slightly downward, and the people watching him could see the moment it landed. The slight stilling of his jaw, the almost imperceptible change in his posture, the way a person looks when the floor they were certain about shifts by a quarter-inch beneath them. He set his phone on the table. He did not speak. Marcella lowered her wine glass. Her mouth opened.
Then it closed.
She looked at Nora, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time all evening, and found nothing on her daughter's face that gave her anything to work with.
No triumph. No anger. No tears.
Just Nora, sitting at the dining table, exactly as she had been sitting for the past hour, completely composed, completely present, completely herself. Marcella's mouth opened again. Nothing came out. The friend who had laughed the loudest 20 minutes ago was looking very carefully at the centerpiece. Nora stood. She didn't push her chair back dramatically. She rose the way she had been sitting. Quietly, deliberately, and she held her phone loosely at her side and looked at the table of people who had spent the evening deciding, in their various ways, what she amounted to. She did not raise her voice. "I've been working on this project for 18 months, she said. Under a full confidentiality agreement. I couldn't discuss it with anyone. Not professionally, not personally." She let that sit for a moment. "I couldn't tell you what I was doing or why. I missed dinners. I missed events. I know how that looked." Another pause. "But I want to be clear about something. I couldn't tell anyone. Not because I had nothing to show." Her voice was steady, unhurried, the voice of a woman who had been waiting a long time to say something true. But because real work doesn't always come with an announcement. She looked at the table. Until tonight. Silence. Not the polite silence of people being considerate. The deep, pressurized silence of 40 people processing the gap between what they had assumed and what had just been confirmed. Comment one word right now, just one word, that describes exactly what you're feeling in this moment. I'll be reading every single one. It was her father who broke it. Elias had moved from the kitchen doorway at some point during the phone call. Nora hadn't noticed him approach, and he was standing now at the edge of the dining room, neither inside the moment nor outside it, caught in the threshold the way he had spent most of his life caught between things. His voice, when it came, was quiet and strained in a way she had almost never heard from him. "Nora." She looked at him. His face was doing something complicated, the expression of a man who has just understood something that should have been obvious much earlier and is confronting the full cost of having missed it. His jaw was working slightly. His eyes were not quite steady. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. It was not an accusation. There was no edge to it, no defense built into it. It was simply raw. The sound of a man realizing, in a room full of people, that he had never once asked his daughter how she was doing in a way that left space for an honest answer. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "I couldn't, Dad," she said simply. That was the agreement. He nodded once slowly, the nod of someone accepting an answer that explains the facts but not the feeling, and knowing the feeling is the part they'll have to sit with for a long time. Movement to her left. She didn't need to look. She knew the particular quality of that stillness before it shifted. Tobias crossed the room without a word, no announcement, no gesture toward the crowd, no performance of any kind. He simply walked to where Nora was standing and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, facing the room. That was all. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said the only thing that mattered. She does not stand alone. Several people at the table noticed. Several people looked away. Oliver cleared his throat. He stood, and the movement had the quality of someone who has rehearsed being gracious and is deploying that rehearsal now, in real time, under conditions it was not quite designed for. He crossed to where Nora stood and extended his hand, then seemed to think better of the formality of it and moved toward a brief, slightly stiff embrace instead. "Nora, this is incredible," he said. "Genuinely. I had no idea. None of us did. You should be so proud of yourself." The warmth in his voice was real. It was also too fast. Too full. The warmth of someone who understood, somewhere below the words, that the ground had shifted and was adjusting his footing accordingly. Nora stepped back from the embrace. She looked at her brother, his open face, his easy handsomeness, the way he had always occupied rooms like he was born to be in them, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something that had been waiting a long time to stop pretending it wasn't there. "Thank you, Oliver," she said. Just that. 2 words.
Calm.
Complete. Final. Oliver blinked. He had expected more, a reciprocal warmth, a reassurance, the natural back and forth of siblings finding their way back to each other. The simplicity of what she'd given him instead left him standing slightly off balance, smile still in place but eyes uncertain. He nodded and stepped back. Marcella had recovered enough to speak. She set her wineglass down with a precise little click and turned to the table with the composure of a woman who had been managing rooms her entire life and was not about to stop now. "Well," she said, her voice smooth and warm and carefully reconstructed. "She should have said something. We would have celebrated. We would have done all of this for her. That's all we've ever wanted." She opened her hands slightly, a gesture of reasonableness. "If she had just told us." "She couldn't tell you." The voice came from the far end of the table, soft, unhurried, completely certain. The gray-haired neighbor who had asked about Nora's work earlier in the evening. The woman who had received Marcella's dismissal about her daughter and nodded politely and looked uncertain. She was not looking uncertain now. She just explained that, the woman said simply. She was under a confidentiality agreement. She couldn't tell anyone. A brief pause. "And you," she stopped. Chose her next words carefully, the way people do when they are saying something that needs to land cleanly. "You called her useless. An hour ago. In front of all of us." The table went completely still. Marcella's expression did not collapse. It held, but only just. The seams of it were visible in a way they had not been all evening. The carefully assembled architecture of a woman who curated every room she entered showing its first real crack. Nobody spoke. The friend who had laughed the loudest had her eyes on the table and had not moved in 30 seconds. Silas Monroe was looking at his phone, not reading it, just holding it, the way people hold something when they need to be doing something with their hands. Elias stood in the doorway and said nothing. But this time he did not look away. Nora picked up her phone from the table. She walked to the front hallway without hurrying. She lifted her coat from the rack by the door. The same rack that had held her coat every winter of her childhood. The same iron hook her father had installed when she was 7 years old. She put the coat on. She buttoned it. She smoothed the collar. Then she turned. The dining room was visible from the hallway. The table, the people, the soft chandelier light, the flowers in the borrowed vases, the banner above the fireplace still reading "Congratulations, Oliver Larkins." She looked at Oliver. "Congratulations," she said. "I mean that." And then she opened the front door and walked out into the October night and closed it behind her, not with a slam, not with force, just with the quiet, final sound of a door finding its frame. The night air outside her mother's house was cold and clean and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside it. Nora walked to her car without rushing. Her heels made small, precise sounds on the driveway, each one deliberate, each one carrying her further from the warm light spilling through the front windows of a house that had spent the evening making her feel like a footnote. She got in. She closed the door. She sat for a moment in the dark and the quiet, hands resting on the steering wheel, not starting the engine yet. Through the windshield, she could see the silhouette of the banner through the dining room window. "Congratulations, Oliver Larkins." The chandelier light, the shapes of people moving. She started the car and pulled out of the driveway. She was home by 12:37. She made tea. She changed out of her dress. She sat on her couch with her legs folded underneath her and her phone on the cushion beside her, and she let herself breathe, really breathe for the first time in what felt like weeks. The phone began to move before her tea had cooled. First a notification, then another, then the family group chat, a thread that usually moved slowly, exchanging birthday messages and forwarded articles, and the occasional photo, suddenly alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Her cousin Marcus had shared the press release. Just dropped the link with no caption. Let it speak. Then her Aunt Bernadette, her mother's older sister, a quiet woman who had always watched family gatherings from the edges the way Nora did, sent a message directly to Nora, outside the group chat. Private.
Just the two of them.
I always knew. I always saw it in you. Even when you were small, you were the one who finished things. I am so proud of you tonight, sweetheart. Nora read it twice. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The group chat kept moving. Relatives she hadn't spoken to in months were sending congratulations, some with exclamation points, some with brief and genuine warmth, some with the particular energy of people who had been at the party and were now processing the evening in real time through their phones. Someone shared a second article. Someone else sent a prayer hands emoji. Her cousin Rachel, who had laughed at one of Marcella's earlier jokes that evening, sent 3 fire emojis and nothing else, which was, in its own way, an apology. Nora read through all of it slowly, without hurrying. She was still reading when her phone rang. Oliver. She looked at his name on the screen for a moment. The same name that had been on a banner in their mother's dining room 4 hours ago, and answered.
Hey, she said.
Hey. His voice was different from what it had been at the party. The easy confidence was gone, not replaced by anything dramatic, just quieter. More careful. I said something I can't take back, she said. In front of people who will remember it. She looked at her hands. And I think I've been saying it in smaller ways for a long time. Things I told myself were just honesty. Just concern. She looked up. But I think I've been comparing you to your brother since before you were old enough to have a fair chance. And I told myself it was pushing you. But I don't think it was. The room was very still. Nora sat across from her mother and looked at the woman who had raised her, who had fed her and worried about her and built a version of her in her mind that had very little to do with who she actually was, and she felt the full, complicated weight of loving someone who had hurt you in ways they are only now beginning to understand. She did not rush to close the distance. I need you to hear something, Nora said. Not because I want to hurt you. Because it's true. Marcella held her gaze. I don't need you to be proud of me now, Nora said, because the world said you should be. She kept her voice even. I needed you to believe in me when there was nothing to show. When I was just working quietly without a title or an announcement or a banner on the wall. I needed you to look at me then and think. She's doing something. She's building something. Even if I can't see it yet.
She paused.
That's when it would have mattered. Marcella opened her mouth. And then she closed it, because there was no answer for that. Not a real one. Not one that undid 18 months of being called a worry, a phase, a woman who had never amounted to anything. The truth of what Nora had said sat in the room between them like an object, solid and immovable, and Marcella, for perhaps the first time in her daughter's memory, did not try to move it. She nodded once. Her eyes were bright in a way she was working to control. I hear you, she said quietly. It was not an absolution. It was not a resolution. It was a beginning, fragile and imperfect and real, and Nora decided, for now, that it was enough to start. A week after that, her father called and asked if she wanted to get coffee. Not dinner. Not a family event.
Just coffee.
The two of them. They met at a small place near the river, the kind of cafe that doesn't try too hard, with wooden tables and windows that let in the morning light at a low angle. Elias was already there when she arrived, sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug, looking out the window with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing something and was no longer sure how to begin. They talked about small things at first. The weather turning. A book he'd been reading. Work. The easy surface of a conversation between two people who love each other and have not yet found the language for the thing underneath. Then, near the end, when the cups were almost empty and the morning light had shifted, her father reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and placed something on the table between them. A folded piece of newspaper. Nora looked at it without touching it. It was the article. Her article. Printed in a physical newspaper, the kind her father still subscribed to, the kind that still arrived on the front step in the morning. Someone had cut it out with scissors, cleanly, along the edges. It had been folded and refolded, the crease lines soft from handling. "I've been carrying it since the night it came out," her father said. His voice was low and slightly unsteady in the way men's voices get when they are saying something they have never said before. He stopped. Started again. "I didn't know how to start." Nora looked at the clipping on the table. She thought about all the dinners he had looked away. All the moments he had been present and absent simultaneously, standing in a doorway, choosing neutrality, leaving her to navigate alone. She thought about how much easier everything might have been if he had simply, once, chosen to stay. And then she picked up the clipping. She unfolded it carefully and looked at her own name in print, Nora Larkins, lead consultant, and felt the full strange weight of a private thing becoming public, of a long silence finally having a shape. She folded it back along its worn creases and held it in both hands. "Thank you for keeping it," she said. Elias nodded and looked out the window and pressed his mouth together briefly. They ordered a second cup of coffee, and they stayed a little longer, and the conversation that followed was not perfect. It would take more mornings than one to rebuild what years of looking away had quietly cost, but it was honest. And honest, Nora had learned, was where everything real began. The National Urban Renewal Excellence Award ceremony was held on a Thursday evening in November, in a ballroom that smelled of old wood and fresh flowers, and the specific anticipation of a room full of people who had worked very hard for a very long time. Nora arrived with Tobias. He had worn a jacket she had not seen before, dark, well-fitted, understated in the way that everything about him was understated. He had said very little on the drive over, which was exactly right because very little needed saying. He had been beside her at the party, when it mattered. He was beside her now. That was the whole of it. Malcolm was in the front row when they took their seats. He turned, found her face in the room, and gave her the particular nod of a man who had watched someone build something extraordinary from the inside and was profoundly glad to be in the room when it was finally recognized. The ceremony moved through its categories with the measured pace of these things: speeches, acknowledgments, the careful language of institutional recognition. Nora sat with her hands folded and her breathing even, and let herself be present without bracing for anything. Then her name. Nora Larkins, lead consultant and impact framework architect, Meridian Urban Renewal Initiative. She rose. The walk to the podium was not long, but she felt each step of it. The full distance between the woman who had sat against the wall at her mother's party and the woman walking toward a microphone in a room where every person knew exactly what she had built. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the room. She had prepared something. She delivered it simply, without performance, the way she did most things. "I spent 18 months working on something I couldn't talk about," she said. "And in that time, there were people in my life who decided the silence meant I had nothing. I don't blame them entirely. Silence can look like absence from the outside." She paused. "But I learned something in those 18 months that I want to say clearly, in this room, tonight." She let the quiet hold for just a moment. Doing the work quietly is not the same as doing the wrong work. Sometimes the truth just needs a little time to find the right room. She looked down briefly at her prepared notes, then set them aside. It found its room. "Thank you." The applause that followed was warm and full and real. Tobias was on his feet before most of the room. 3 weeks after the ceremony, on a Sunday in late November, Nora's phone showed a message from her mother. "Dinner tonight? Just us. I mean it this time." Nora looked at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "I'll be there at 6. She arrived to find the house quiet. No banners, no borrowed vases, no rearranged furniture. Just the table set for 4. Elias in the kitchen finishing something that smelled like the roast he made every winter when the weather turned. Oliver at the counter, cutting bread, looking up when she came in and giving her a simple, clean smile. No performance in it. Just her brother, glad to see her. And at the head of the table, the head, where Elias usually sat, where Oliver had sat the night of the party, a chair, pulled slightly out from the table, waiting. Marcella came in from the kitchen with a serving dish and set it down without ceremony. She met Nora's eyes briefly. She said nothing about the chair. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't frame it as a gesture. She simply went back to the kitchen to get the rest of the food.
Nora stood at the entrance of the dining room and looked at the chair at the head of the table and understood, without a word being said, exactly what it meant. Not a crowning. Not a grand apology. Just a chair, pulled out, in the right place, finally. She walked across the room and sat down. Nora never chased the spotlight. She never asked anyone to watch her work, to celebrate her effort, or to believe in something she couldn't yet show them. She just kept building, in the dark, in the quiet, without applause, because she believed the work was worth it. And the truth? It found its own stage. If this story made you feel something tonight, that is not a coincidence. You were meant to hear it. Share it with someone in your life who has been told they are not enough, not yet, not quite. Someone doing the work quietly, without recognition, without anyone asking how they are doing. They need to hear that the chair at the head of the table has their name on it. They just have to keep going. And if you want more stories like this, the subscribe button is right there. We tell the truth in this place. We make it feel like something. We are just getting started.